The burning Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as Theresa Holloway stared at the receding dust cloud, the sound of wagon wheels still ringing in her ears. Her husband of 3 months had abandoned her in the middle of the desert with nothing but a small satchel of belongings and the clothes on her back. The year was 1873, and the promise of a new life in California had just disappeared over the horizon, along with Henry Holloway and the woman he truly loved, her former friend, Lucy. Theresa's throat tightened as she watched the last visible sign of the wagon train vanish. She had given up everything to follow Henry west, her family's modest but comfortable home in Boston, her position as a schoolteacher, her reputation. And now she stood alone, 22 years old, abandoned in an unforgiving landscape that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. She dropped to her knees, the rough sand scraping through the thin fabric of her dress. Tears streamed down her face, cutting clean paths through the dust that had accumulated during their journey. How could she have been so blind? The signs had been there: Henry's coldness, the whispered conversations with Lucy, the way they'd look at each other when they thought no one was watching. "You're a burden, Theresa," he'd finally declared that morning. "Too refined for frontier life. Lucy understands what it takes to survive out here." With that, he'd ordered her from the wagon, tossed down her bag, and driven away, leaving her to whatever fate awaited a lone woman in the desert. The sob that escaped her was raw and primal. She'd never felt so utterly alone, so completely betrayed. As the sun climbed higher in the cloudless sky, Theresa knew she couldn't stay where she was. She had to move, find water, find shelter, find civilization, or die trying. Rising on shaky legs, she clutched her satchel and squinted at the landscape around her. In the distance, rocky formations rose from the desert floor. Perhaps there would be shade there, possibly even water. With no better plan, Theresa began walking, each step a rebellion against Henry's assumption that she would perish. Hours passed. The sun tracked mercilessly across the sky as Theresa's steps grew more unsteady. Her throat burned with thirst, and her fair skin, unaccustomed to such exposure, had turned an angry red. The rocky outcropping seemed no closer, a cruel mirage taunting her forward. When she stumbled for the third time, Theresa didn't get up. The ground was hot beneath her cheek as she lay there, wondering if this was how her story would end. Not as the respected schoolteacher she'd been, nor as the pioneer wife she'd hoped to become, but as nameless bones bleaching in the desert sun. A shadow fell across her face, bringing blessed relief from the sun's glare. At first, she thought it was death coming to claim her, but then she heard a voice, deep and rough-edged. "Madam, can you hear me?" With tremendous effort, Theresa rolled onto her back. The figure above her was backlit by the sun, his features indistinguishable, but she could make out the broad-brimmed hat and the strong silhouette of a man on horseback. "Water," she managed to rasp. The man dismounted in one fluid motion. Strong hands gently lifted her head, and then blessed coolness touched her lips as he helped her drink from a canteen. Theresa gulped greedily until he pulled it away. "Easy now. Too much at once will make you sick." As her vision cleared, she got her first look at her rescuer. Tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a stormy sky. A week's worth of stubble covered his jaw, and dust clung to his well-worn clothes. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way Henry had been, but there was something compelling about his weathered face. "What's your name, madam?" he asked, helping her to sit up. "Theresa. Theresa Holloway." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, scratchy and weak. "Victor Reeves," he replied. "Mind telling me what you're doing out here alone?" "Nearest town's 20 miles east." The question brought fresh tears to Theresa's eyes. How could she explain the depth of her humiliation? But as she looked into Victor's face, she saw no judgment, only concern. My husband, she began, her voice breaking. He left me here, abandoned me for another woman on our way to California. Victor's expression hardened, his jaw tightening visibly. He left you to die, he said. Not a question but a statement filled with quiet anger. Theresa could only nod, the reality of her situation crashing over her anew. Victor looked toward the horizon, then back at her. Night's coming soon, and you're in no condition to travel far. My camp's about an hour's ride from here. I can take you there, get you properly fed and rested, then bring you to Willow Creek tomorrow. Theresa hesitated. She didn't know this man, and going with him meant putting her life in his hands. But staying meant certain death, and something in his steady gaze reassured her. Thank you, she said simply. Victor nodded once, then helped her to her feet. When her legs gave way, he caught her without comment and lifted her onto his horse before mounting behind her. As they set off across the desert, his arm around her waist to keep her steady, Theresa felt the last of her strength ebb away. She leaned back against his chest, too exhausted to maintain any semblance of propriety. Just before consciousness slipped away entirely, she heard his voice close to her ear, solid and certain as the ground beneath them. You'll never walk this land alone again. When Theresa awoke, stars glittered overhead, more numerous than she'd ever seen in Boston. She lay on a bedroll near a small campfire, a blanket tucked around her. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, then the events of the day came rushing back. She turned her head to find Victor crouched by the fire, stirring something in a battered pot. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up. Good, you're awake, he said, his voice carrying easily in the still night air. How are you feeling? Theresa took stock of her condition. Her head pounded. Her skin felt tight and painful, and every muscle ached. But she was alive. Better, she replied, attempting to sit up. Victor moved to her side, supporting her with a steady hand. Take it slow. You've got sunburned something fierce, and you're still dehydrated. He helped her drink more water, then offered her a tin plate of beans and bacon. Theresa couldn't remember ever being so hungry. She ate every bite, too famished to be embarrassed by her lack of decorum. Thank you, she said when she'd finished. I don't know how to repay your kindness. Victor shook his head. No need for that. Couldn't leave you out there. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Your husband. Did he give you any reason? Theresa looked down at her hands, now clasped tightly in her lap. He said I wasn't suited for frontier life, that I was too refined. The word tasted bitter in her mouth. He's been carrying on with Lucy, a woman from another family, in our wagon train for weeks, perhaps longer. I suppose I didn't want to see it. Some men don't deserve the wives they have, Victor said quietly. No man with a shred of honor would leave a woman alone in this country, no matter the circumstances. His words warmed something inside her that had nothing to do with the fire. Are you from around here, Mr. Reeves? Call me Victor, he said. And yes, I've ranched about 30 miles south of here for the past 5 years. Was out tracking some strays when I found you. You have a ranch? Theresa asked, trying to imagine this solitary man with a home and family. Just a small spread. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. There was unmistakable pride in his voice. It's just me and a couple of hands. My wife passed 4 years ago. I'm sorry, Theresa said softly. Victor nodded his acknowledgement. Life out here is hard on women. Sarah caught fever one winter. Doctor was 3 days' ride away. His face, illuminated by firelight, showed an old grief, long carried. They sat in companionable silence for a time, the crackling of the fire and the occasional call of a night bird the only sounds. What will you do now? Victor finally asked. It was the question Theresa had been avoiding. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have some money saved, enough for a stage ticket east, perhaps. But there's nothing for me in Boston anymore. My parents are gone and I—" She trailed off, realizing how bleak her prospects truly were. "Willow Creek's a decent town," Victor offered. "Growing. They're looking for a schoolteacher." Theresa looked up, surprised. "How did you know I was a teacher?" The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "You speak like one. Educated. Proper." She felt a blush rise to her cheeks, unsure if he meant it as a compliment or was echoing Henry's criticisms. "I'm not sure how proper I can be, given my circumstances. Folks out here care more about what you can do than where you came from," Victor said. "Town's desperate for someone to teach the children. The last teacher left 6 months ago to get married." Hope stirred in Theresa's chest for the first time since Henry had abandoned her. "Do you really think they would hire me? A woman with no husband, no references." "I'd vouch for you," Victor said simply. "My word carries some weight in Willow Creek." Theresa didn't know what to say. This stranger was offering her not just rescue, but a future, a chance to rebuild her life using the skills she had. "Get some rest," Victor said, rising to his feet. "We'll head to town at first light. It's about a 4-hour ride from here." As he turned away to tend to his horse, Theresa called after him. "Thank you, Victor. Not just for saving my life, but for—" She gestured helplessly, unable to articulate all he had given her. He nodded once, understanding in his eyes. "Sleep well, Theresa." Under the vast canopy of stars, with the fire's warmth beside her and the knowledge that she was safe, Theresa finally allowed herself to truly rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, for the first time since leaving Boston, she felt something like peace. The journey to Willow Creek began at dawn. Victor had fashioned a makeshift sunshade for Theresa using a spare shirt stretched over bent branches, protecting her already burned skin from further damage. She rode behind him on his horse, one arm tentatively around his waist for balance. As they traveled, the landscape gradually changed from barren desert to scrubland dotted with mesquite and prickly pear. Victor pointed out landmarks and shared bits of local knowledge: where to find water, which plants were edible, how to read the sky for coming weather. Theresa listened intently, struck by how little she knew about surviving in this harsh but beautiful country. "The desert has its own rules," Victor explained. "Respect them, and you can make a life here." "Did it take you long to learn?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment before answering. "Came out here after the war. Needed open space after 4 years of blood and chaos. Made plenty of mistakes at first, but I had good teachers." "The war," Theresa repeated softly. She'd been just a girl when the Civil War ended, sheltered from its worst horrors in her parents' Boston home. "Which side?" "Union cavalry," he replied. "But out here, that matters less than whether you're honest and work hard." They rode in silence for a while, each lost in thought. Theresa found herself studying Victor's hands on the rain-strong, calloused hands that spoke of years of physical labor. So different from Henry's smooth palms and manicured nails. Henry had been a merchant's son, and used to true work. Perhaps that was why he'd found her too refined, too much a reminder of the Eastern life he claimed to have left behind. "There it is," Victor said, interrupting her thoughts. "Willow Creek." Theresa peered over his shoulder. In the distance, a collection of buildings rose from the landscape, not large, but substantial enough to be called a proper town. As they drew closer, she could make out a church steeple, a 2-story building that might be a hotel, and various businesses lining a main street. "It's bigger than I expected," she admitted. "Silver mine opened up in the hills 2 years ago," Victor explained. "Town's been growing ever since. There's a school building, but it's sitting empty now." As they rode down the main street, Theresa became acutely aware of her appearance. Her dress was dirty and wrinkled, her hair a tangled mess, her skin sunburned and peeling. What impression would she make on the townspeople whose children she hoped to teach? People paused in their activities to watch them pass. Several men nodded at Victor, who returned their greetings with a touch to his hat brim. A few women whispered behind their hands, eyeing Theresa with undisguised curiosity. Victor guided his horse to a hitching post outside a whitewashed building with a sign proclaiming it the Willow Creek Hotel and Dining Room. He dismounted first, then helped Theresa down with careful hands. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground, and used to so many hours in the saddle. Victor steadied her with a hand at her elbow. "Sheriff's office is across the street," he said. "I'll take you there first, report what happened. Then we can get you a room here and see about meeting the town council about the teaching position." Theresa nodded, suddenly overwhelmed. Everything was happening so quickly. Yesterday, she'd been certain she would die alone in the desert. Today, she was contemplating a new life in this frontier town. The sheriff's office was a small building with barred windows and a weathered wooden door. Inside, a man with a silver star pinned to his vest looked up from his desk as they entered. "Reeves," he acknowledged. Then his eyes shifted to Theresa. "Madam." "Sheriff Taylor," Victor greeted him. "This is Mrs. Theresa Holloway. Found her yesterday, abandoned in the desert about 20 miles west of here." The sheriff's bushy eyebrows rose. "Abandoned?" Victor gestured for Theresa to explain. Taking a deep breath, she recounted her story, her marriage to Henry, their journey west with the wagon train, and his ultimate betrayal. She kept her account factual and brief, though her voice shook slightly at times. When she finished, Sheriff Taylor's expression was grim. "Sorry to hear that, Mrs. Holloway. Your husband committed a serious crime, leaving you to die like that. If you want to press charges, I can send wires to sheriffs along the California Trail." Theresa hesitated. The thought of facing Henry again, of a public trial where her humiliation would be laid bare for all to see, made her stomach churn. I don't think so," she said finally. "I just want to move forward with my life." The sheriff nodded, looking relieved. Pursuing a man across hundreds of miles of territory would be difficult and costly. "As you wish, but I'll make a report all the same, in case he ever shows his face around these parts." After answering a few more questions and signing a statement, they left the sheriff's office. Victor led her across the street to the hotel, where he arranged a room for her and paid for a week's board in advance, despite her protests. "You can pay me back when you start earning," he said firmly. "For now, you need rest and time to recover." The hotel proprietress, a plump woman named Mrs. Winters, took one look at Theresa's sunburned face and clucked her tongue in sympathy. "You poor dear. I'll have a bath sent up right away, and some salve for that burn." Upstairs, the room was simple but clean: a bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl, a small wooden chair, and a window overlooking the main street. To Theresa, accustomed to the refined comforts of her Boston home but having spent weeks sleeping in a crowded wagon, it seemed like luxury. True to her word, Mrs. Winters soon arrived with 2 young men carrying a copper tub, followed by others with buckets of hot water. She also brought a clean dress, left behind by a traveler some months back, never claimed, and the promised salve. "I'll return in an hour," Victor said from the doorway. "The town council meets this evening at the church. I've sent word that we'll be attending." After he left, Theresa sank into the bath with a sigh of pure relief. As she washed away the dust and sweat of the desert, she found herself thinking about Victor Reeves' quiet strength, his unfailing kindness, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he almost smiled. She wondered what his ranch was like, and whether he was truly content living there with just a couple of hands for company. She shook her head, dismissing such thoughts. Victor had saved her life and offered her a chance at a new beginning. That was all. Her heart was too bruised, her trust too shattered, to contemplate anything more. For now, she would focus on securing the teaching position and establishing herself in Willow Creek. The future beyond that could wait. Clean, dressed in the borrowed gown that was a bit too large but blessedly fresh, Theresa stood at the window watching the activity in the street below. Willow Creek was a far cry from Boston, with its dirt roads and wooden buildings, but there was an energy to the place, people purposefully going about their business, building something out of the wilderness. Perhaps she could find a place here after all. Perhaps this abandonment that had seemed like the end of her life was actually the beginning of something new, something better. A knock at the door announced Victor's return. When she opened it, she found him similarly refreshed, his face clean-shaven, his clothes changed, his dark hair still damp from his own bath. The transformation was striking. Without the trail dust and stubble, he looked younger, though the lines of experience remained etched around his eyes and mouth. For a moment, he simply looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. Then he cleared his throat. "You look much improved, Mrs. Holloway." "As do you, Mr. Reeves," she replied, a small smile tugging at her lips. "And please call me Theresa. After all we've been through, formality seems unnecessary." He nodded. "Theresa, then, are you feeling up to meeting the town council? We could postpone if you need more rest." "No," she said firmly. "I want to do this now. The sooner I can secure employment, the sooner I can repay your kindness and begin my new life here." "You don't owe me anything," Victor said, his voice low and serious. "I want to be clear about that. Nevertheless, I intend to stand on my own 2 feet as quickly as possible," Theresa replied. "I've depended on others for too long." A look of respect crossed Victor's face. "Then let's go meet your future employers." The church was a simple white-clapboard building with a modest steeple. Inside, plain wooden pews faced a pulpit, and a small table had been set up at the front where 5 men sat in earnest conversation. They fell silent as Victor led Theresa down the aisle. "Gentlemen," Victor said, nodding to the assembled council. "Reeves," acknowledged a gray-haired man at the center of the table. "This must be the lady you mentioned in your message." "Yes. May I present Mrs. Theresa Holloway, formerly a schoolteacher in Boston." "Theresa, this is Mayor Williams and the Town Council of Willow Creek." Theresa stepped forward, conscious of the men's scrutiny. "Good evening, gentlemen. I understand you're in need of a teacher." For the next hour, the council questioned her about her qualifications, teaching methods, and educational philosophy. Theresa answered confidently, drawing on her years of experience in Boston. She explained her approach to discipline, firm but fair, her views on education for girls, equal to that of boys, and her willingness to adapt her curriculum to include practical frontier knowledge alongside traditional subjects. Throughout, Victor stood quietly at her side, offering his presence as silent support. When Mayor Williams raised the delicate matter of her marital status, Victor spoke up. "Mrs. Holloway's husband abandoned her to die in the desert," he said bluntly. "Sheriff Taylor has the full report. She's seeking a fresh start, and I can vouch for her character." The mayor looked uncomfortable. "No offense meant, Mrs. Holloway. It's just that teaching children is a position of moral authority, and my moral character is beyond reproach, Mayor Williams." Theresa interrupted, her voice steady despite the flush rising to her cheeks. "I have been a faithful wife and a dedicated teacher. The failure in my marriage lies entirely with my husband, not with me." A heavy silence followed her words. Then the youngest council member, a bespectacled man introduced as Dr. Parker, spoke up. "My daughter is 8 years old and has had no formal education since Miss Jenkins left. Mrs. Holloway is qualified and willing. I see no reason to deny our children a teacher while we wait for some hypothetical perfect candidate to appear." Murmurs of agreement followed. After a brief private consultation, Mayor Williams turned back to Theresa with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Welcome to Willow Creek, Mrs. Holloway. The position pays $30 a month, with lodging provided in the rooms above the schoolhouse. Classes begin next Monday, which should give you time to prepare." Relief washed over Theresa. "Thank you, gentlemen. I won't disappoint you." As they left the church, the setting sun cast long shadows across the dusty street. Victor walked beside her, his stride measured to match her shorter steps. "You did well in there," he said. "Stood your ground." "Thank you." Theresa glanced up at him. "And thank you for speaking on my behalf. I know your word carried weight with them." Victor shrugged. "Just told the truth as I see it." They reached the hotel and paused at the entrance. An awkward moment stretched between them, neither quite sure how to say goodbye now that their immediate mission was accomplished. "Will you be returning to your ranch now?" Theresa finally asked. "Not right away. I'll stay in town through the weekend, help you get settled at the schoolhouse." He hesitated, then added, "If that's all right with you." "I would appreciate that very much," she admitted. The thought of facing her new life entirely alone was daunting, despite her brave words to the council. "Then I'll meet you for breakfast tomorrow, around 8, Victor suggested. Theresa nodded. "I'll look forward to it." As she watched him walk away toward the livery stable where he'd arranged to board his horse, Theresa was struck by a strange mixture of emotions: gratitude, uncertainty, and something else she couldn't quite name. In just 2 days, this man had become the center of her new world, her rescuer and advocate. Yet she knew almost nothing about him beyond the basic facts he'd shared. Tomorrow, she decided, she would learn more about Victor Reeves, and perhaps, in the process, discover more about the woman she herself was becoming in this wild new land. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. True to his word, Victor helped Theresa settle into her new home above the schoolhouse, a modest 2-room apartment with simple furnishings. Together they cleaned the schoolroom, which had gathered dust during the months it sat empty, and arranged the desks in neat rows. Victor repaired a broken window and several wobbly chairs, while Theresa organized the small collection of books and supplies. Mrs. Winters from the hotel provided linens for Theresa's bed and basic cooking utensils. The town's general store owner extended credit for food and necessities until her first month's pay. Several mothers brought their children to meet the new teacher, offering shy welcomes and curious glances. Through it all, Victor remained a steady presence, offering practical help, introducing her to townspeople, explaining local customs and concerns. Each evening, they shared a simple meal at the hotel's dining room, where Theresa gradually learned more about the quiet rancher who had saved her life. He had grown up in Pennsylvania, the son of a blacksmith, joined the Union Army at 19 and spent 4 brutal years fighting across the South. After the war, unable to settle back into civilian life in his hometown, where too many memories haunted him, he had drifted west. In Arizona Territory, he'd found work as a ranch hand, eventually saving enough to buy his own small spread. "It's not much compared to some," he told her as they walked back to the schoolhouse after dinner on their 3rd evening in town. 200 acres, most of it scrubland. But the creek runs year-round, and I've built up a decent herd. 50 head of cattle now, and growing." "It sounds wonderful," Theresa said sincerely. "To build something of your own, from nothing." Victor glanced at her, something warming in his usually guarded expression. "That's what you're doing too, you know. Building a new life from nothing." The comparison startled her. "I suppose I am," she agreed slowly. "Though I have considerably more help than you did." "Everyone needs help sometimes," Victor said. No shame in that. They reached the schoolhouse, and Theresa paused at the steps leading to her apartment. The evening was cool, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. For a moment, neither spoke, reluctant to end their conversation. "What about your wife?" Theresa finally asked, the question that had been lingering in her mind. "You mentioned she died of fever, but you've said little else about her." A shadow crossed Victor's face. "Sarah was a good woman, daughter of a rancher near Tucson. We were married 3 years before she got sick." He looked away, his gaze fixed on some distant point. "She wanted children. We both did. But it never happened." The simple statement held volumes of unspoken grief. Theresa's heart ached for him. "I'm sorry, Victor." He nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy. "It was a long time ago." "4 years isn't so very long," Theresa said gently. Victor's eyes returned to her face, studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "No," he agreed softly, "not so very long." Then, as if catching himself, he stepped back. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow's your last day to prepare before classes start." "Yes, of course." Theresa tried to hide her disappointment at the abrupt end to their conversation. "Good night, Victor." "Good night, Theresa." She watched him walk away, his tall figure soon swallowed by the gathering darkness. With a sigh, she climbed the stairs to her apartment, wondering why his departure left her feeling so bereft. Inside, she lit the lamp and moved to the window, gazing out at the now familiar outline of Willow Creek. In less than a week, her life had transformed completely. From devoted wife to abandoned woman to respected teacher. From the refined society of Boston to the raw frontier of Arizona territory. And at the center of this transformation was Victor Reeves, a man as direct and uncompromising as the land he had chosen to call home. A man who, despite his gruff exterior, had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. Theresa placed a hand against the cool glass of the window. Tomorrow would be their last day together before he returned to his ranch. The thought brought an unexpected pang of loneliness. She had grown accustomed to his quiet company, his dry observations, the sense of safety she felt in his presence. But that was foolish. Victor had responsibilities at his ranch, and she had a new life to build, a classroom of children waiting for her guidance. Their paths had crossed by chance or providence, but there was no reason to think they would continue to intersect. Was there? Shaking her head at her own fanciful thoughts, Theresa turned away from the window. She needed to focus on the practical matters at hand. Tomorrow she would finish preparing her classroom and lesson plans. On Monday, she would meet her students. She would teach and live and slowly heal from Henry's betrayal. And if, in quiet moments, her thoughts strayed to a pair of storm-gray eyes and hands roughened by honest work, well, that was no one's concern but her own. Monday morning dawned clear and bright, with a crispness to the air that hinted at the coming autumn. Theresa stood at the schoolhouse door, watching as children began to arrive, some walking from town, others riding in on horses or wagons from outlying farms and ranches. Their ages ranged from barely 6 to nearly 16, their expressions varying from excited to wary to openly curious. Victor had left the previous afternoon, riding south toward his ranch with a promise to return in a few weeks to see how you're settling in. Their goodbye had been brief and somewhat awkward, neither quite knowing how to acknowledge the connection that had formed between them. Now, as Theresa greeted her new pupils with a warm smile, she pushed thoughts of Victor aside. These children deserved her full attention and dedication. They were her future now, her purpose. By noon, Theresa knew she had made the right decision in accepting the position. Despite the challenges of teaching multiple age groups in one room, she found herself energized by the children's enthusiasm and hungry minds. They were different from her Boston pupils, more self-reliant, more knowledgeable about practical matters, less concerned with social niceties, but their eagerness to learn transcended such differences. When school dismissed for the day, several mothers waited outside to meet her properly. Among them was Sarah Parker, the doctor's wife, a kind-faced woman who invited Theresa to Sunday dinner the following weekend. "It's nothing formal," Mrs. Parker assured her, "but we'd love to welcome you properly to Willow Creek." Theresa accepted gratefully. Despite the warm reception she'd received, she felt the isolation of her position as a woman alone in a frontier town. Friendships with the local families would be essential to her well-being and success. As the weeks passed, Theresa settled into a comfortable routine. Weekdays were filled with teaching, evenings with grading and preparation. On Saturdays, she cleaned her small apartment and did her marketing in town. Sundays brought church and occasional social invitations. To her surprise, Willow Creek proved more accepting of her unusual circumstances than she had feared. Perhaps it was the frontier spirit, where survival often depended on looking forward rather than back. Perhaps it was the town's desperate need for a teacher. Or perhaps it was simply that most people were too occupied with their own struggles to dwell on hers. Whatever the reason, Theresa found herself gradually being absorbed into the community. She joined the ladies' sewing circle that met on Wednesday evenings, contributed baked goods to church socials, and offered reading lessons to adults who had never had the opportunity to learn. And if sometimes, in the quiet of her apartment, she wondered about Victor Reeves, whether he was safe, whether his cattle were thriving, whether he ever thought of her well, that was her private concern. Nearly a month after her arrival in Willow Creek, Theresa was writing mathematical problems on the blackboard when she heard a commotion outside. Turning, she saw her students craning their necks to look out the windows. "Children, focus on your work, please," she said firmly. But young Tommy Jenkins couldn't contain himself. "Miss, it's Mr. Reeves and his men. They're bringing cattle through town." Theresa's heart gave an unexpected leap. She hadn't seen or heard from Victor since he'd left that Sunday afternoon. "That's no excuse for ignoring your studies, Tommy. Now, who can tell me the answer to this problem?" But her own concentration was shattered. As she guided her students through their lessons, her thoughts kept straying to the man outside. Would he stop by the school? Or would he simply pass through town on his way to wherever he was taking his cattle? When the final bell rang at 3 o'clock, Theresa found herself dismissing the children with unusual haste. She straightened her desk, smoothed her hair, and tried to calm her racing pulse. This reaction was ridiculous. Victor was merely an acquaintance who had once helped her. His return to town was of no special significance. Yet when a knock sounded at the schoolhouse door 15 minutes later, her hands trembled slightly as she went to answer it. Victor stood on the steps, hat in hand, looking much as he had the day they'd met, trail dusty and unshaven, but with those same steady gray eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully composed facade. "Theresa," he greeted her, his deep voice sending an inexplicable warmth through her. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Victor, no, not at all. The children are gone for the day." She stepped back, gesturing him inside. "Please, come in." He entered, his tall frame seeming to fill the modest schoolroom. His gaze swept over the neatly arranged desks, the educational charts on the walls, the carefully printed alphabet above the blackboard. "You've made this place your own," he observed. "I've tried," Theresa replied. "The children are wonderful, eager to learn and full of questions about the world beyond Willow Creek. And you? How are you finding frontier life?" His eyes returned to her face, searching. "Better than my husband believed I would," she said with a small smile. "The people here have been kind and welcoming, and the work is fulfilling." Victor nodded, seeming pleased by her answer. "I brought cattle to sell to the mine company," he explained. "Thought I'd check on you while I was in town." "That was thoughtful of you." Theresa hesitated, then added, "Would you like to come up to my apartment for coffee? It's not much, but I'd like that," Victor interrupted gently. Upstairs, Theresa moved about her small kitchen, heating water and measuring coffee grounds, acutely aware of Victor's presence. He stood by the window, looking out over the town, seemingly comfortable with the silence between them. "How is your ranch?" she asked as she set 2 cups on the table. "Thriving," he replied, turning to face her. "The summer rains were good this year. Pastures rich, cattle are fat. And your men? You mentioned you had hired hands." A faint smile touched Victor's lips. "Curious about my life, Theresa?" She felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Merely making conversation. Miguel and Jeb," he said, accepting the cup she offered. "Miguel's been with me since I bought the place. Mexican fellow, best horseman I've ever seen. Jeb joined last year, young kid from Texas looking to learn ranching." "It sounds lonely," Theresa said without thinking, then immediately regretted her words. "I'm sorry, that was presumptuous of me." Victor studied her over the rim of his cup. "Honest, not presumptuous," he corrected. "And yes, it can be lonely, but it's a good life. Honest work, land that responds to care, freedom to live by my own rules." "I can understand the appeal of that," Theresa admitted. "After living by others' expectations for so long." Something flickered in Victor's eyes, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. "How long were you married?" he asked. 3 months, Theresa replied, "though we were engaged for a year before that. Henry courted me for 2 years, ever so properly. My parents approved wholeheartedly. He came from a good family, had prospects in his father's shipping business." She sighed. "When he proposed going west to seek greater opportunities, I agreed because that's what a good wife does. I never imagined he was using the journey as an opportunity to discard me." "Some men don't deserve the title," Victor said, echoing his words from their first night in the desert. "No," Theresa agreed softly. "They don't." She hesitated, then asked, "Will you stay in town tonight?" "Plan to," Victor confirmed. "We'll leave with the empty wagons tomorrow, after I've concluded business with the mine superintendent. Then perhaps you might escort me to dinner at the hotel." Theresa suggested, her heart beating faster. "Unless you have other arrangements, of course." "No other arrangements," Victor said, his voice warming slightly. "I'd be honored to escort you, Theresa." That evening, dressed in her best gown, a deep blue calico purchased with her first month's wages, Theresa met Victor in the hotel lobby. He too had made an effort, wearing a clean shirt and string tie, his hair still damp from washing. The dining room buzzed with conversation, most of it revolving around the upcoming town harvest festival. Several people greeted Theresa warmly, eyeing Victor with undisguised curiosity. A few made knowing remarks about the rancher finally coming to town, which Victor acknowledged with good-natured tolerance. "You seem to have quite a reputation here," Theresa observed as they were seated at a corner table. "Small towns," Victor said with a shrug. "Everyone knows everyone's business, or thinks they do." "And what do they think they know about you?" Theresa asked, genuinely curious. Victor's mouth quirked in a rare smile. "That I'm a hard-working rancher who keeps to himself. That I fought for the Union and don't talk about it. That I've been alone since Sarah died and showed no interest in changing that fact. Until now." The words slipped out before Theresa could stop them. Their eyes met across the table, and something electric passed between them. "Until now," Victor agreed quietly. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of their food, but its impact lingered throughout the meal. They spoke of lighter matters, the children's progress, the upcoming festival, the changing seasons, but underneath ran a current of mutual awareness, of possibilities neither was quite ready to name. After dinner, Victor walked Theresa back to the schoolhouse. The night was cool and clear, stars blazing overhead in a way they never had in Boston's smoke-hazed skies. They walked slowly, neither eager for the evening to end. At the schoolhouse steps, they paused. Theresa turned to face Victor, suddenly shy despite the ease of their conversation throughout the evening. "Thank you for dinner," she said, "and for checking on me. It means a great deal." Victor took a step closer, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Theresa, I want to be honest with you. I didn't come to town just to sell cattle. I could have sent Miguel to handle that." Her breath caught. "Then why did you come? I think you know." His voice was low, intimate in the quiet night. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since I left. About your courage, your determination. The way you've made a place for yourself here despite everything." "Victor." Theresa began, not sure what she wanted to say. "I know it's too soon," he continued. "You've barely had time to heal from what your husband did. And I'm not a man given to hasty actions or easy words. But I want you to know that when I'm ready, when we're both ready, I'd like to court you properly. If you'd consider it." Tears pricked at Theresa's eyes, unexpected and overwhelming. No one had ever spoken to her with such honest regard, such respect for her choices and her feelings. "I would consider it," she whispered, "very favorably." Victor's hand rose to cup her cheek, his touch gentle despite the calluses that spoke of his hard work. For a moment, Theresa thought he might kiss her and realized with a start that she wanted him to. But instead, he simply brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. "I'll return in 2 weeks," he promised, "for the Harvest Festival. Will you save a dance for me?" "I'll save all of them," Theresa replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Victor's smile, then warm and genuine, transforming his weathered face, was something she knew she would carry with her in the days to come. "Good night, Theresa," he said, stepping back reluctantly. "Good night, Victor. Safe journey home." As she watched him walk away, Theresa felt something unfurling within her, something she had thought withered and dead after Henry's betrayal. Hope, not just for survival or independence, but for happiness, for love. The man who had found her dying in the desert, who had promised she would never walk this land alone again, was offering her far more than rescue. He was offering her a future. And this time, she would walk into it with her eyes wide open, her heart cautious but willing. For the first time since Henry had abandoned her, Theresa felt truly grateful for the cruel twist of fate that had brought her to this place, this moment, this possibility of a new beginning. The 2 weeks until the Harvest Festival crawled by with agonizing slowness. Theresa threw herself into her teaching and festival preparations, volunteering to help decorate the town square and organize children's games. The activity helped distract her from thoughts of Victor, though he was never far from her mind. On the morning of the festival, Theresa woke early, too excited to sleep. She carefully pressed her best dress and arranged her hair in a more elaborate style than her usual practical schoolteacher's bun. Looking in the small mirror above her washstand, she hardly recognized herself. Her skin had darkened slightly from the Arizona sun, bringing out golden highlights in her brown hair. The constant activity of frontier life had lent a healthy glow to her complexion and trimmed her figure. But the most noticeable change was in her eyes. Once shy and deferential, they now held a confidence born of survival and self-reliance. The festival began at noon, transforming Willow Creek's dusty Main Street into a celebration of harvest bounty. Tables groaned under the weight of home-cooked dishes. Bunting and paper lanterns decorated storefronts. A platform had been erected for dancing, where 3 local musicians tuned their instruments of fiddle, guitar, and harmonica. Children ran laughing between the stalls of games and treats, while adults gathered in clusters to catch up on news and gossip. Theresa moved among them, greeting her students and their families, joining in the community's celebration while her eyes continually scanned the crowd for one particular tall figure. As the afternoon waned and Victor still hadn't appeared, anxiety began to gnaw at her. Had something happened to prevent his coming? Had he changed his mind about his interest in her? Had she misinterpreted his intentions? "Looking for someone, Mrs. Holloway?" asked Dr. Parker, appearing at her elbow with a knowing smile. Theresa blushed. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to those with eyes," the doctor replied kindly. "Reeves is a good man, solid, not one for fancy words or grand gestures, but when he gives his word, you can build a foundation on it." "He said he would come today," Theresa admitted. Dr. Parker glanced toward the southern end of town. "Well, I believe that's dust from riders coming in now. Could be him and his men." Theresa's heart leapt. Sure enough, 3 horsemen were approaching, still distant but unmistakable. As they drew closer, she recognized Victor's broad-shouldered silhouette, flanked by 2 other men, presumably Miguel and Jeb. "If you'll excuse me, Doctor," Theresa said hurriedly, "I should check on my pie for the judging." Dr. Parker's amused chuckle followed her as she made her way through the crowd, trying not to appear too eager as she positioned herself near the edge of the festival where the riders would arrive. Victor spotted her immediately as they rode in, his eyes finding hers across the bustling square. He dismounted in one fluid motion and handed his reins to the younger of his companions, murmuring something that made the boy grin and nod. Then he was striding toward her, hat in hand, his face breaking into a rare smile that transformed his usually serious expression. "Theresa," he greeted her, his voice warming her name like sunshine. "Victor," she replied, suddenly shy despite the anticipation that had built over the past 2 weeks. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come. Had to finish the branding," he explained. "Wouldn't have missed this for anything less important." A small silence fell between them, filled with unspoken words and the bustle of the festival around them. Then Victor offered his arm. "Would you show me around? I haven't been to the Harvest Festival in 2 years." Theresa placed her hand on his sleeve, hyper-aware of the solid strength beneath the clean fabric. "I'd be delighted." They moved through the festival together, stopping to greet townspeople, sample food, and watch the children's games. Victor introduced her to his ranch hands Miguel, a weathered Mexican man with kind eyes and a dignified bearing, and Jeb, barely 20, with freckles and an eager grin. "The señora is even more bonita than you said, Patron," Miguel commented with a twinkle in his eye, making Victor clear his throat and Theresa blush. As evening approached, lanterns were lit and the musicians began to play in earnest. Couples moved onto the dance platform, swirling to the lively tunes. Victor watched for a few minutes, then turned to Theresa. "I believe you promised me a dance," he said, extending his hand. "All of them, actually," Theresa replied with a small smile. His eyes darkened. "I'd hold you to that if it wouldn't set tongues wagging even more than they already are." He led her onto the platform just as the musicians struck up a waltz. Victor's hand settled at her waist, warm and steady, as he guided her into the dance. He moved with unexpected grace for such a large man, leading her confidently through the steps. "You dance well," Theresa observed, slightly breathless from more than just the movement. "Sarah insisted I learn," Victor replied. "Said a man should know how to dance with his wife." A shadow crossed his face at the mention of his late wife, but it passed quickly. "She would have liked you, I think." The simple statement touched Theresa deeply. "I wish I could have known her." They danced in companionable silence for a time, each lost in thought yet acutely aware of the other. When the music ended, Victor didn't immediately release her, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "Would you walk with me?" he asked quietly. Somewhere we can talk privately? Theresa nodded, suddenly nervous yet excited. They slipped away from the festival, strolling toward the quiet end of town where the schoolhouse stood. The music and laughter faded behind them as they walked in silence, the tension between them building with each step. At the schoolhouse steps they paused. The moon was rising, casting silver light over the landscape and illuminating Victor's face as he turned to her. "Theresa," he began, his deep voice rough with emotion. "I'm not a man given to flowery speech or grand declarations. But these past weeks, being away from you, have made one thing very clear to me." She waited, heart pounding, as he chose his words with careful deliberation. "When I found you in the desert, something changed for me," he continued. "I'd been existing, not living, going through the motions day by day, telling myself it was enough. But it wasn't. You woke something in me I thought had died with Sarah." "Victor," Theresa whispered, tears threatening. He took her hands in his touch gentle despite the strength she knew those hands possessed. "I know it's fast. I know you're still healing from what happened with your husband, and I won't rush you, but I want you to know that my intentions are serious. I care for you, Theresa, deeply." The simple honesty of his declaration moved her more than any elaborate profession of love could have. This was a man who meant what he said, who would stand by his word no matter what came. "I care for you too," she admitted. "When I think of how we met, of all the terrible things that had to happen to bring me to that moment in the desert, I can only believe that some higher power was at work. That I was meant to be found by you." Victor's hands tightened on hers. "Do you believe in second chances, Theresa?" "I'm living one," she replied softly. "Every day I teach, every moment I build this new life. It's a second chance I never thought I'd have." "I'm asking for one too," Victor said. "A second chance at love, at life, with you." He was asking without asking. She realized, giving her the space to choose, to decide for herself without pressure or obligation. It was perhaps the most precious gift anyone had ever given her. "Yes," Theresa said simply. "Yes, Victor." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down until his lips met hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. His hands cradled her face as if she were something infinitely precious. And in that moment, Theresa felt truly cherished for perhaps the first time in her life. When they finally parted, Victor rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "I should take you back to the festival before someone comes looking for you," he said reluctantly. "Probably," Theresa agreed, equally reluctant to break the moment. "Victor, how will this work? You at your ranch, me here teaching? We'll figure it out," he promised. "I can come to town more often, and perhaps you might visit the ranch on school holidays. Meet my world as I've met yours." The invitation thrilled her. "I'd like that very much." They walked back to the festival hand in hand, both aware that their appearance together would confirm the town's suspicions about their relationship. But neither cared. Something precious had been acknowledged between them, a beginning made on the foundation of mutual respect and genuine caring. As they rejoined the celebration, several knowing glances were exchanged among the townspeople, but the reactions were largely positive. Theresa was well liked as a teacher, and Victor respected as a hard-working rancher. Their growing attachment seemed natural to most observers, two good people who had each suffered loss, finding comfort and hope in each other. They danced again, talked with friends, and enjoyed the festivities until the late hours. When it came time for good night, Victor walked Theresa home once more, their parting kiss at her door sweeter for the promises it held. "I'll return in 2 weeks," Victor said. "Sooner if I can manage it." "I'll be waiting," Theresa replied, her heart fuller than she had thought possible after Henry's betrayal. As she prepared for bed that night, Theresa found herself humming the waltz they had danced to, her body still remembering the feel of Victor's strong arms around her. Outside her window, the vast Arizona sky glittered with stars, no longer seeming alien and threatening as it had the night Henry abandoned her, but full of possibility and wonder. She was no longer alone in this wild land, and though the path ahead might not be easy, she would walk it with a man who had already proven his character in the most fundamental way by seeing value in her when she had been discarded, by offering respect when she had been humiliated, by giving her the freedom to choose her own future when others had decided it for her. For the first time since arriving in Arizona territory, Theresa felt truly at home. The courtship of Theresa Holloway and Victor Reeves became the subject of gentle gossip throughout Willow Creek. True to his word, Victor rode into town every 2 weeks, staying for the weekend before returning to his ranch duties. On these visits, he would escort Theresa to dinner, church services, and whatever social events the small town offered. Sometimes they simply walked together, talking for hours about their pasts, their hopes, their beliefs. With each visit, Theresa learned more about the quiet rancher who had captured her heart. He spoke of his childhood in Pennsylvania, of his father's blacksmith shop where he'd learned the value of honest work, of the war that had changed him, though he shared few details of the battles he'd seen, of his dreams for his ranch, the improvements he planned, the legacy he hoped to build. In turn, she told him of her Boston upbringing, her passion for education, her brief marriage to Henry. With Victor, she could be honest about her fears and disappointments in a way she'd never been with anyone else. He listened without judgment, offering support without trying to solve every problem or dictate her choices. December arrived, bringing cooler temperatures to the desert and preparations for Christmas throughout Willow Creek. The schoolhouse was decorated with paper chains and pine boughs, and Theresa's students practiced songs for the Christmas Eve program at the church. A week before the holiday, Victor arrived in town earlier than expected, appearing at the schoolhouse just as classes were dismissing for the day. "Victor!" Theresa exclaimed in delighted surprise as he stepped into the classroom. "I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." "Couldn't wait," he replied, his eyes warming as they took in the sight of her. "Got the ranch work done early." The children giggled and whispered among themselves at this uncharacteristic display of sentiment from the usually reserved rancher. Theresa felt a blush rise to her cheeks as she shooed her students out the door with reminders about their homework. When the last child had gone, Victor crossed the room and took her hands in his. "I've missed you," he said simply. "And I you," Theresa replied, allowing herself to be drawn into his embrace. These moments of physical closeness were still new enough to make her heart race, yet increasingly familiar and comforting. Victor kissed her softly, then more deeply as she responded with equal fervor. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, he kept his arms around her waist. "I have something important to ask you," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice that was so unlike him it made Theresa's pulse quicken. "But not here. Will you ride with me tomorrow? There's a place I'd like to show you." "Of course," Theresa agreed, curious about what could make the steadfast Victor nervous. "I don't have classes on Saturday." The next morning dawned clear and cool, the desert landscape transformed by winter light. Victor arrived at the schoolhouse with 2 horses, his own sturdy gelding, and a gentle mare borrowed from the livery stable. He helped Theresa mount, his hands lingering at her waist, then swung up onto his own horse with practiced ease. They rode south out of town, following a trail that wound through mesquite thickets and stands of saguaro cactus. Victor pointed out landmarks and signs of wildlife as they traveled, teaching her to read the desert as he had promised that first day. After about an hour's ride, they crested a small rise, and Victor reined his horse to a stop. There it is, he said, gesturing ahead. My ranch. Theresa looked where he indicated, taking in the view with interest. Below them, a modest ranch house of adobe and wood stood in a small valley, smoke rising from its chimney. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, a barn, corrals, what looked like a bunkhouse. A creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwood trees that had shed their leaves for winter. In the pastures beyond, cattle grazed contentedly. It wasn't a grand estate by any means, but there was something deeply appealing about its sturdy practicality, its harmony with the surrounding landscape. This was a place built with purpose and care, a true home rather than a mere shelter. It's wonderful, Victor, Theresa said sincerely. Everything you described and more. He smiled, pleased by her reaction. Come on. I want you to see it up close. They rode down into the valley, approaching the ranch house. As they drew nearer, Theresa noticed fresh paint on the window frames and newly planted shrubs along the front path, signs of recent improvements. Had Victor been preparing for this visit? Miguel emerged from the barn as they arrived, greeting Theresa with a respectful nod. Welcome to Rancho Reeves, Senora. The house is ready as you requested, Patron. Thank you, Miguel, Victor replied, dismounting and moving to help Theresa down from her horse. We won't be staying long today, but I wanted Mrs. Holloway to see the place. Miguel's eyes twinkled knowingly. Of course. I will be in the barn if you need anything. He led their horses away, leaving them alone. Victor offered Theresa his arm. Would you like to see the house? She nodded, suddenly nervous, though she couldn't have explained why. They walked up the path to the wooden porch that wrapped around the front of the adobe structure. Victor opened the door and stepped back, allowing Theresa to enter first. The main room was simply but comfortably furnished. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a wooden table and chairs for dining, a sturdy sofa covered in faded but clean fabric, and a rocking chair near the hearth. Braided rugs softened the wooden floor, and curtains framed the windows. Doorways led to what Theresa presumed were bedrooms and perhaps a kitchen. It's not fancy, Victor said, watching her reaction closely. But it's solid, built to last. It's perfect, Theresa replied honestly. It feels like a home. Something in Victor's expression shifted at her words, tension giving way to determination. He took her hands in his, leading her to stand before the hearth where a small fire burned welcomingly. Theresa, he began, his voice rougher than usual. I brought you here today because I wanted you to see my world, the life I've built, the place that's become my home. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. But it's not complete. Hasn't been since Sarah died. Maybe not even before that. Theresa's heart began to pound as she realized where this conversation was heading. Victor's hands tightened on hers. I love you, Theresa, he said simply. These past months of knowing you, of watching you build your own life from nothing, of seeing your strength and kindness. I've fallen in love with you, deeply and completely. Tears pricked at Theresa's eyes, but she remained silent, letting him continue. I know it hasn't been long, Victor acknowledged, and I promised not to rush you, but I also know what I want, what I feel. I want to share my life with you, to make a home with you here, or in town, or wherever suits us both. He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that glinted in the firelight. Theresa Holloway, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? The ring he held was a simple gold band set with a small sapphire. Not ostentatious, but beautiful in its understated elegance, much like the man offering it. Theresa looked from the ring to Victor's face, seeing the vulnerability beneath his usual stoic expression. This strong, self-sufficient man was offering her his heart, his home, his future, not because he needed someone to complete him, but because he wanted to share his complete self with her. Yes, she said, her voice clear and certain despite the tears now flowing freely. Yes, Victor, I will marry you. Joy transformed his features as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he was pulling her into his arms, his kiss fierce and tender all at once, a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally parted, Victor kept his arms around her, his forehead resting against hers. I never thought I'd feel this way again, he admitted quietly. After Sarah died, I thought that part of me was finished. But you brought it back to life. You gave me hope again. And you gave it to me, Theresa replied. When Henry left me in the desert, I thought my life was over. You didn't just save me, Victor. You showed me I was worth saving. They stood together before the hearth, wrapped in each other's arms, the future stretching before them not without challenges, but full of promise. Two people who had known loss and betrayal, finding in each other the strength to trust and love again. When? Victor asked finally. When will you marry me? Theresa smiled up at him. I need to finish the school term, she said practically. I promised the children and their parents. That's another 3 months. Victor nodded, unsurprised by her sense of duty. Spring, then. A good time for beginnings. Yes, Theresa agreed. A perfect time. They spent another hour exploring the ranch together, Victor showing her the improvements he'd made and those he planned. They discussed practical matters, whether Theresa would continue teaching after their marriage, how they would divide their time between the ranch and town, what changes might make the house more comfortable for both of them. Throughout the tour, Theresa found herself falling more deeply in love with both the place and the man. This ranch was truly an extension of Victor himself, unpretentious, solid, built with care and foresight. She could easily imagine making a life here, perhaps even raising children here someday. As they rode back to town in the afternoon light, Theresa's new ring catching the sun's rays, a deep contentment settled over her. 6 months ago, abandoned and desperate in the desert, she could never have imagined this future. Yet here she was, engaged to a good man, established in a respected position, accepted by a community that valued her contributions. What are you thinking? Victor asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. That sometimes what seems like the end is really just the beginning, Theresa replied. If Henry hadn't abandoned me that day, I never would have met you. Never would have discovered my own strength. Never would have found this life that suits me so much better than the one I thought I wanted. Victor reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. From the moment I found you, I knew you were a woman of uncommon courage. It's one of the many things I love about you. And what else do you love about me, Mr. Reeves? Theresa asked teasingly, still marveling at the ease that had grown between them. Your kindness, he replied without hesitation. Your intelligence. The way you've won over every child and parent in Willow Creek. The fact that you see beauty in this harsh land that many find ugly or frightening. His voice deepened. The way you fit perfectly in my arms. Theresa blushed at the intimate tone of his last words. Though their courtship had been conducted with proper restraint, there had been moments like their kisses at the schoolhouse door, or today in front of his hearth when the physical attraction between them threatened to overwhelm propriety. 3 months will seem very long, she admitted softly. Victor's eyes darkened with understanding. Yes, he agreed, but worth the wait. News of their engagement spread quickly through Willow Creek. Most reactions were enthusiastically positive. The schoolteacher and the rancher made a fine match, people agreed. A few raised eyebrows at the relatively brief courtship, but given the circumstances of frontier life, where practicality often outweighed convention, even these concerns were mild. The following 3 months passed in a blur of activity. Theresa continued teaching, while also preparing for her upcoming marriage and eventual move to the ranch. Victor rode into town every weekend, sometimes staying through Monday to help with preparations before returning to his ranch duties. Together they made plans for their future. Theresa would finish the school year, training a replacement teacher who would arrive from Denver in the spring. She and Victor would marry in April, when the desert bloomed with wildflowers. They would divide their time between the ranch and a small house in town that Victor purchased, allowing Theresa to remain involved with the school and community activities while also embracing her new role as a rancher's wife. Christmas came and went, celebrated with the entire town at a gathering in the church, followed by a private exchange of gifts between the engaged couple. Victor gave Theresa a finely crafted writing desk for her new home. She gave him a handsome leather-bound journal, encouraging him to record the history of his ranch for future generations. January brought colder weather and occasional rain, turning the desert briefly green. February saw preparations for the wedding accelerate, with women from the sewing circle helping Theresa create a simple but elegant wedding dress. March brought the first wildflowers and the arrival of Miss Jenkins, the new teacher from Denver, whom Theresa began training to take over her classroom. Through it all, Theresa and Victor's relationship deepened and strengthened. They learned each other's habits and preferences, had their first disagreements and reconciliations, discovered the rhythm of partnership that would sustain their marriage. Their physical relationship remained properly restrained, though the anticipation between them grew with each passing week. Finally, on a perfect April morning with the desert in full bloom, Theresa stood in the back of Willow Creek's church, ready to walk down the aisle to where Victor waited. She wore a dress of ivory silk, simply cut but beautifully fitted, with small pearl buttons down the back that Mrs. Parker had helped her fasten. Her hair was arranged in an elegant knot, adorned with sprigs of desert wildflowers. In her hands, she carried a bouquet of the same blooms. Dr. Parker, who had become something of a father figure to her in Willow Creek, waited to escort her down the aisle. "Ready, my dear?" he asked with a warm smile. "More than ready," Theresa replied, her voice steady with certainty. The small church was filled to capacity. It seemed the entire town had turned out for the occasion. As the music began and Theresa started her walk down the aisle, she saw familiar faces on every side: her students and their families, members of the sewing circle, shopkeepers and ranchers and miners, all come to celebrate this union. And at the front, waiting beside the minister, stood Victor. His expression as he watched her approach took her breath away, a look of such naked adoration and wonder that tears sprang to her eyes. He was dressed in his best suit, his usually unruly hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. But it was the love in his eyes that transformed him, making him the most handsome man she had ever seen. When Dr. Parker placed her hand in Victor's, Theresa felt a sense of rightness so profound it seemed to resonate through her entire being. This was where she belonged, with this man who had found her at her lowest moment and seen not a burden but a treasure. The ceremony itself was brief and traditional, their vows spoken clearly for all to hear. When Victor slipped a second ring onto her finger to join her engagement band, his hands were steady but his eyes revealed the depth of his emotion. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was both tender and passionate, a promise of the life they would share. The celebration afterward, held in the town square, lasted well into the evening. There was food and music, dancing and laughter, toasts and well wishes from what seemed like every resident of Willow Creek. Through it all, Victor kept Theresa close, his hand often finding hers, his eyes frequently seeking out her face as if to reassure himself that this happiness was real. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit around the square, Victor leaned down to whisper in her ear, "Ready to leave, Mrs. Reeves?" The sound of her new name sent a thrill through Theresa. "Yes," she whispered back. "Take me home." They said their goodbyes, accepting final congratulations and ribald advice with good humor, then mounted the horses waiting for them, Victor's gelding, and the mare he had purchased for Theresa as a wedding gift. Together they rode out of town toward the ranch that would be their primary home, though they would maintain the small house in Willow Creek for times when ranch work or weather made the journey impractical. The ride passed mostly in comfortable silence, both lost in thoughts of the day and anticipation of the night to come. As they crested the familiar rise overlooking the ranch, Victor reined his horse to a stop beside Theresa's. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reeves," he said softly. In the gathering darkness, the ranch house glowed with lamplight, smoke curling from the chimney. Miguel and Jeb had gone ahead to prepare it for their arrival, then tactfully removed themselves to the bunkhouse for the night, giving the newlyweds complete privacy. As they approached, Theresa saw that the path to the door was lined with more of the desert wildflowers she had carried in her bouquet, a thoughtful touch that could only have come from Victor's instructions. Her heart swelled with love for this man who continually surprised her with his quiet thoughtfulness. At the door, Victor dismounted and came to help Theresa down. But instead of setting her on her feet, he swung her into his arms. "Victor!" she exclaimed, laughing in surprise. "I can walk." "I know," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "But I made you a promise the day we met, remember? You'll never walk this land alone again." Tears filled Theresa's eyes as she remembered those words, spoken when she was barely conscious, abandoned and desperate in the desert. How far they had come since that day. Victor carried her across the threshold, setting her gently on her feet in the main room of what was now their home. The space had been transformed, fresh flowers adorned every surface. Candles provided golden illumination, and a fire blazed welcomingly in the hearth. On the table, a simple meal waited, along with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. But neither was interested in food just yet. Victor drew Theresa into his arms, his kiss deeper and more urgent than any they had shared before. She responded with equal passion, months of restraint giving way to the knowledge that they were finally properly husband and wife. When they paused for breath, Victor rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Theresa Reeves," he whispered, "more than I have words to express." "Show me," she replied softly, her eyes meeting his with trust and desire. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, they discovered each other fully for the first time. Victor gentle and patient, Theresa shy at first but increasingly confident as they learned together the language of touch and response. Their coming together was both a culmination and a beginning, sealing the promises they had made before God and community with the most intimate bond of all. Afterward, lying in Victor's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Theresa felt a contentment deeper than any she had ever known. This was home, not just the ranch house with its solid walls and welcoming hearth, but this man, this relationship, this shared life they were building. "Happy?" Victor asked softly, his hand stroking her hair. "Completely," Theresa replied, raising her head to look at him. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he admitted. "When I rode out that day and found you in the desert, I had no idea I was really finding myself, the part of me I thought was lost forever." Theresa leaned up to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. "We found each other," she corrected gently. "And now we've found home." Outside their window, the vast Arizona sky glittered with stars, the same stars that had witnessed Theresa's abandonment and despair months earlier. But now, instead of threatening, they seemed to bless the union below, shining their ancient light on 2 people who had journeyed through darkness to find each other and in doing so, had found their way home. Epilogue. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter drifted through the open windows of the ranch house, mingling with the scent of baking bread and the distant lowing of cattle. Theresa Reeves looked up from the papers she was grading at the writing desk Victor had given her that first Christmas, a smile automatically curving her lips at the happy sounds. In the yard, Victor was teaching their 4-year-old son, James, to ride his first pony, a gentle creature barely larger than a dog, chosen specifically for tiny beginners. Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter named for Victor's first wife in a gesture that had seemed perfectly natural to both of them, toddled after them on chubby legs, determined not to be left out of the excitement. Watching them through the window, Theresa's heart swelled with a happiness so complete it sometimes still took her breath away. The past 5 years had brought challenges. Of course, the drought that nearly ruined the ranch in their second year of marriage, the difficult birth of Sarah that had left Theresa bedridden for weeks, the occasional friction that came with merging two independent lives. But through it all, their love had only deepened and strengthened, their partnership proving resilient in the face of every trial. The ranch had prospered under their joint care. Victor's cattle herd had doubled, and they'd added horses, goats, and chickens to diversify. The house had expanded too, with additional rooms for the children and improvements that made it more comfortable without sacrificing its practical frontier character. Theresa still taught, though now in a more limited capacity. 3 days a week, she rode into Willow Creek to teach advanced students at the school, which had grown along with the town. The other days, she managed the ranch household, kept the accounts, and educated her own children with the same dedication she showed to her students. Victor had changed too over the years, the reserved man she'd first met gradually opening up as their life together unfolded. He smiled more readily now, laughed more often, particularly with the children. The shadows of war and loss still visited him occasionally, but less frequently as new, happier memories accumulated to balance the old pain. Their partnership had evolved into something neither could have imagined that day in the desert, a marriage of true equals, each respecting the other's strengths, each supporting the other's dreams, each finding in the other the perfect complement to their own nature. Theresa set aside her grading and stepped out onto the porch, drawn by the scene before her. Victor looked up as she appeared, his face lighting with the smile he reserved only for her. "Mama!" James called excitedly. "Look at me. I'm riding by myself." "I see you, sweetheart," Theresa replied, descending the steps to join her family. "You're a natural, just like your father." Sarah toddled to her mother, arms raised demandingly. "Up, Mama, up!" Theresa scooped her daughter into her arms, settling the child on her hip as they watched James complete another circle of the yard on his pony, Victor walking alongside with a lead rope, ready to intervene if needed. "He's getting good," Victor commented as they completed the circuit and stopped near Theresa. "Got a natural seat, just like you said." "Of course he does," Theresa replied with a smile. "He's your son." Victor's gaze softened as he looked at her and Sarah. "And your daughter has your brains. Found her with one of your books this morning, pretending to read." "Starting early," Theresa laughed. "Soon enough she'll be reading for real." "Down, Mama," Sarah insisted, wriggling to be free. When Theresa set her on her feet, the little girl immediately moved to pat the pony's nose, fearless despite her small size. "Careful, Sarah," Victor cautioned, though his tone was more proud than worried. Both children had inherited their parents' determination and independence, traits that would serve them well in the frontier life they were being raised to navigate. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose, the Reeves family made their way back to the house together. James proudly led his pony to the small corral Victor had built especially for him, while Sarah chattered about the jackrabbit she'd spotted earlier. Inside, the evening routine unfolded with practiced ease, a family meal at the table Victor had crafted himself, bath time for the children in the large copper tub, bedtime stories read by lamplight, goodnight kisses and prayers. Through it all ran a current of deep contentment, the knowledge that this life, though not always easy, was rich beyond measure in the ways that truly mattered. Later, with the children asleep and the house quiet save for the crackling of the fire, Theresa and Victor sat together on the porch, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Victor's arm rested comfortably around her shoulders, while her head leaned against his chest, the position as natural to them now as breathing. "I got a letter from Boston today," Theresa said after a comfortable silence. "My cousin Elizabeth. She's finally decided to visit us next spring." "About time," Victor commented. "It's been, 6 years since you've seen any of your family?" "Nearly 7, Theresa corrected. "Not since the wedding to Henry." She still spoke his name without bitterness now, time and happiness having healed the wounds of his betrayal. Elizabeth was the only one who wrote after. "After what happened, the others thought I had disgraced the family by being abandoned." Victor's arm tightened around her. "Their loss," he said simply. "They missed knowing the extraordinary woman you've become." Theresa smiled, turning her face up to his. "Have I mentioned today that I love you, Victor Reeves?" "Not since breakfast," he replied with a mock frown. "I was beginning to worry." She laughed, the sound still one of his favorite things in the world. "I love you," she said, reaching up to trace the beloved lines of his face. "For saving my life, for believing in me, for building this wonderful life with me, for everything." Victor leaned down to kiss her, the gesture as tender as it was passionate after years of marriage. "And I love you, Theresa Reeves, more with each passing day." They sat together as night fully claimed the desert, comfortable in their silence, secure in their love. Above them, the stars that had witnessed their beginning now blessed their continued journey together. And around them, the land that had once seemed so harsh and unforgiving to Theresa now felt like exactly where she belonged, no longer a place of abandonment and fear, but a place of belonging and hope. She had been left alone in the desert, but she had never walked this land alone again. Instead, she had found love, family, purpose, and home, all because a man with integrity and compassion had kept his promise to a woman in need. As they finally rose to go inside, hand in hand, Theresa sent a silent prayer of gratitude into the vast Arizona night for second chances, for unexpected journeys, and for the perfect rightness of finding love in the last place she had ever expected.